Well, it's great to talk, Maggie. Thanks for taking the time. And what I think is the maddest news cycle we've had in a long, long time. So, for those of you who don't know, Maliki, you're a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist with the New York Times Visual Investigations team. You've led so many consequential investigations into, most recently, the US protests during the summer, Russian airstrikes on hospitals in Syria, and many, many more. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. But first, can you just talk us through about what you actually do on the Visual Investigations team at the New York Times?
Yep. Thanks, Rona. The work that we do is predicated on the idea that there's lots of video footage or photos, satellite imagery, police scanner, audio, security camera footage, a lot of documentary evidence of events in the world that when we can collect it all together, verify it, and analyze it, we're able to sort of reconstruct events and establish the truth around what happened on consequential events in a way that's transparent, but also, fairly conclusive. And that's valuable when you have a government that's denying a human rights abuse or a war crime, when you have, a police force that is acting, breaching its use of force guidelines towards protesters, or in fact, last week we did a piece and we caught a guy on tape who tried to kill police by shooting at them. And so, that's the type of work that we do. And it's useful for that, but also if there's like a chaotic event, you can kind of get a deeper understanding from it. And I have a few slides actually to sort of give examples of the type of work that we do.
That would be great.
Okay. While I'm loading these, like the thing that we always try to do is to, when we're deciding on the stories that we'll pursue, is it visual? Is it impactful and revealing, and will it be original as well? So can you see that screen?
Yeah.
This cover image is actually from Hong Kong last year. More and more we're doing this collection of evidence remotely, but we're also going on the ground and talking to sources and getting sort of deeper into the stories. So, I mean, one example would be the Las Vegas shooting from 3 years ago. It's the worst shooting in modern American history. Close to 60 people were killed and several hundred, I think around 500 people were shot. And the police, when they were investigating this, were very, very tight-lipped. And in fact, they changed the timeline and some of the details around the event. And so in the chaos of it, a lot of the specifics and what exactly happened were lost. And we wanted to establish a timeline that was independent of what the police were putting out there. We sought to do that using cell phone footage, like all of these videos here that were filmed by witnesses and concert goers and people who were over at the hotel beside the gunman. And by collecting and organizing all of these and of course verifying them, we were able to basically recreate that horrific event in video from multiple different angles and analyze what was going on. And the starting point, as I say, is collecting all of these videos. And then the second thing is listening and analyzing them, watching them back. And they were horrifying, really, but they contained interesting information. So you can see these are literally my notes from watching those back, and 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm thinking maybe that might be the 5th burst, 6th burst, and 7th burst, because the duration of each burst, the interval in time to the next one, and the duration of that one, and the interval to the next one, and so on, it matched almost to the sort of microsecond, what I was hearing and seeing in another video. And so I started stacking these videos up and seeing when there was overlap in them. And so you're kind of threading them together and piecing the puzzle together and the jigsaw together like that. And then, looking at the audio waveform, this is the audio signature for each of those videos, and each of those spikes is the crack of a bullet, and so you can line up when you're hearing them and when you're not hearing them. And they're not exact replicas, because people are ducking to the ground and putting the phone back in their pocket, or they hit it off something. But you can get a pretty close replica. And then, as I say, you're looking frame by frame through the footage for other clues. The timestamps. This is a car clock, and this is a taxi that picked up some of the shootings. The taxi booking system, a mobile phone, one of the concert goers who was ducking from the gunman who was over at this hotel. And then the police released some body cam footage, and so we included that in our analysis as well. And then we kind of strung all of that out and layered on top of that the police audio and the audio from the ambulances. So in the US, it's possible to record these open frequencies, and there are websites that do that. And because we had the timing very precise from here, we were able to layer that footage over, and in fact pair up the bursts of fire with the videos as well. And so you got a really deep kind of recreation of what happened, where the police first responded, when they responded, when they took fire. This is a police body cam. They had to hide behind this wall, and he started directing his fire at them around 4 or 5 minutes into the rampage, which allowed people to flee. When he shot indoors in the hotel as well, because some hotel staff came down the corridor to check out what was going on. And this one other interesting detail is that this entrance to the concert grounds remained closed. So actually a lot of the people who were killed were behind that fence and in that area. And so, you just get a sort of a more detailed and specific and technically accurate reconstruction of what happened that I think people really engaged with. Might just do another example of a story. Just maybe quickly go through this one, which is again another sad story, a chemical weapons attack in Syria that the Syrian government denied and Russia denied, and they said the event was staged, or the opposition forces that control the area where it happened had carried it out. And so this was what you're seeing on screen here is a chlorine canister that was dropped onto an apartment building and leaked chlorine late one night into the building below and killed a lot of people. And what we were doing, often we'll use satellite imagery to assess what was going on in the area on that particular day. And this is the street that it happened on, and you can see a lot of the buildings there are intact, but within 24 hours that whole area was obliterated. And so it became the focus of the Syrian military during their campaign to retake this area from the opposition. And the chemical attack happened here in this building. And that was important context, because we found out later from sources that this street that they targeted was an ambulance run. And if I go back, there was a tunnel entrance that you could see here that led to an underground hospital through that roundabout. And so they were really trying to cut off access to that last functioning hospital, which is consistent with what the Syrian military did, and their Russian partners, was make life unlivable and the population will give up. And so often what we'll do is use this satellite imagery from different angles to get very precise details that allow us to remodel the building and place all of these red dots are the victims that were inside, that we were able to verify using video that was sent to us by sources who were there in the town. We actually had been investigating another chemical attack in the area when this happened, so we had a good source network. And then we, although we couldn't get access to the balcony itself where this bomb landed, the Russian media did get access to it, and these are all of their camera positions, which allowed us to create a 3D model of that balcony and examine both the weapon, the canister itself, and all of the clues that lay around and the debris. Just to give an example of that, this is just like a tangled mess of junk of metal, but actually, when you look closer, there's a wheel on it here, and there's an axle, and there's these long straps leading down to it, and there's a fin here, and there's another fin over here. And when we extrapolate that out, because we have the dimensions now, it actually is a rigging, and we had seen this rigging used in previous attacks. And the rigging is used to wheel these canisters out of a helicopter, and the fins create drag so that they'll point nose down, and it stabilizes them in flight and really turns them into a missile. And the dimensions of this thing fit perfectly onto the canister that was left behind. There were other clues as well, such as on the underside of the canister, there was this imprint, and the dimensions of that matched, this lattice, this kind of wire mesh perfectly. So these are all clues that you kind of stack upon one after the other to try to come to a conclusion about how this happened. And it's important that this thing was designed to fly from, designed to be stabilized in flight, and that it kind of hit this balcony at great force, because only Syria and Russia control the airspace. Their militaries are flying helicopters and planes around the place. There were other clues as well. I think this was the most damning, perhaps. This is a frame of a video that was filmed beneath the bomb in the building several hours afterwards, and you can see that it's covered in white. It's the exact shape and dimensions of the weapon, and it's in the same position as the daylight photographs filmed the following or taken the following morning, where you can see the rebar just holding it up there. And a question we had was, well, why is it white and why is it not yellow? Why is that photograph not reflecting yellow? And the Chlorine Institute told us that, well, this is what's called an auto-refrigeration effect, that when these bombs detonate and chlorine leaks out of them, the liquid chlorine that's left on the underside, inside in the canister, goes so cold to minus 29 degrees Fahrenheit that it creates a layer of frost around it. And so that to us told us it was an active weapon, that it had actively, just emptied its contents, when this photograph, in the hours before this photograph was taken. And so if we could find out precisely when that video or that photograph was taken, we could determine when this attack happened. Was it on the night that everybody said it happened, all the witnesses who told us, or was it months or years ago, or was it somehow staged, as the Syrian government was alleging? And we managed this. By the way, this icing was a behavior we had observed in previous attacks. This is a previous chlorine attack by the Syrian government, and you can see that icing effect. But we found that guy, and we got the original file from him, and it had, just like in the Las Vegas example, it had the time and the date imprinted in the video file, and that was the night that witnesses that the attack happened and that people were killed. And so all of this together kind of helped to debunk that Syrian and Russian narrative about the attack.
It's really fascinating. So how many of you are working on your team at the New York Times doing that kind of work?
Now there's 15, 16 of us. Now a few of them we're in the election season at the moment. So when there are big stories like that, a few will peel off. But there's about 15, 16 of us now, and that's comprised of reporters and story producers, video editors, motion graphics animators, and some of the team have like several specialties. I'm working right now on a story with an architect. It's the same architect who modeled that building using fragmentary videos and the satellite imagery. And one of the team is an expert in satellite imagery analysis, and he did some of that analysis there as well. Spent 10 years at Amnesty. Some of them are very good at, doing what you guys do at Storyful, at combing the open web and finding video evidence and photo evidence and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's a mix of people.
Right, and how old is the team there at the New York Times?
Just 3 years.
3 years old.
Yeah.
I remember when you won the Pulitzer this year, you made remarks, thanking the leadership of the New York Times for actually taking a chance on this new form of journalism. So can you talk a bit about like how this all came about, how you got to the New York Times and how you started working on this type of journalism?
The company that you work at, Storyful, was my gateway drug, and that was really where I started this type of journalism, I would say. Prior to that, I had worked a little bit in Village for a couple of years. Vincent Brown is an uncle of mine, and he kindly offered me a job there if I would build a website for him, for the magazine, which I did. And so I worked there. So that was my introduction to journalism, really. I was a computer programmer before that. And then when Mark Little set up Storyful, I was intrigued by that and ended up joining, and that was a great success and really enjoyed it. And so the thing that Storyful was doing, as you know, is listening to the world really through social media, through what people are reporting on social media, and then reporting out those stories, visualizing them, ensuring people who are filming something get credit or compensation for the footage. And I think really setting a layer of trust. 10 years ago, it was a very untrusted medium by a lot of the mainstream media, the Channel 4s, BBCs, New York Times, ABC, and Storyful developed an expertise in finding and verifying this content. And so these mainstream news outlets felt more comfortable using it.
Right. It's interesting that it was back in 2009, 2010 that it was kind of dealing with the verification and sort of fake news before it was fake news. Like, how do you trust what you see online? And it's still a question that we're dealing with today in 2020.
Even more so.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. So then from Storyful, how did you get to the New York Times?
There was... I left Storyful and I joined another startup for my sins, which was called Reportedly. It was an American one, and but I was based in Dublin, and we were doing kind of similar work to Storyful, but in a more public forum. And around that time, the New York Times had done what's called the Innovation Report, I think it's what it's called, and they basically wanted to study the media landscape and where they fared in it, how their competitors were doing, and they realized there was a big gap in their digital products and their digital journalism, their visual journalism. Very good at the traditional visual journalism, but I think in other ways they wanted to develop, and they started to look for folks from non-traditional backgrounds and who had these different specialties, I think, and so yeah, it was weird. It was a casual conversation that ended up in a job, basically. And myself and Siobhan, my wife, decided to move over and give it a try for 2 years. It was 4 years ago.
4 years ago. That's how it goes, though. So was it much of a transition then you went from these scrappy startups into a big institution that is the New York Times? What was it like getting them to adapt to the new ways of journalism that you had been working on for a few years?
Good question. That was, it wasn't straightforward and it was a bit tricky. And it was great in one sense because like what I really wanted to do was these types of investigations and to leverage the resources and the muscle, if you like, of a big newsroom like the New York Times. But I think there was an expectation when I went there that I could bring the Storyful model and we would apply to breaking news, and we would, we would be much more responsive. And we were. 2016 was a very big year of breaking news, and it was the year that Donald Trump was elected. And so it was fascinating to see all of that unfold and be in the heart of the newsroom for all of that. But it was difficult to execute it because you really needed a journal. It's not a type of a thing that you can suddenly come in and give a presentation and then everybody will pick up on it and we're off. It's a skill that needs to be developed over time, and you really need to start build a team around it. And so we decided to change tack a little bit, and you know, we were rebuilding the strategy, you know, in the video unit at that time anyway, and so yeah, we actually quite deliberately put together a strategy for visual investigations, what that would look like, how we would implement it, and we tried it on a couple of stories, and then the managing editor, the editor, and the deputy editor of investigations called a meeting and said, okay, could you show us what's the reporting that went into this? And then they understood it, and we sold it basically as an opportunity that we could develop. And they said, okay, what do you need? And we didn't get everything. We didn't get the 15 people that we have now then, but we started down the track of identifying talent and starting to build that team and getting the resources that we needed. And so, you know, we started with a very good video editor, Barbara Marcolini, who's a Brazilian journalist who also worked at Storyful, I believe, who was doing her master's in New York at the time, speaks 5 languages. And then we brought in Christoph Keutel, who was the satellite imagery expert from Amnesty. So not a traditional journalist, but had this expertise. And then we had an animator join the team, and we just kind of took it from there and grew slowly.
Right. So do you want to talk a bit more about the sort of work you do? It seems like there is kind of a common thread between all your things. Well, then I'm not going to say I'll let you do that to you, but you've done so many interesting investigations between Las Vegas, which we were just talking about.
Yeah.
But you know, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and of course the Pulitzer Prize winning work that you did on the bombing of hospitals in Syria. So yeah, is there a common thread that you would look for in a story that you want to kind of dig into?
They're all terrible stories and terrible events, and yeah, I mean, a lot of our work is human rights focused, or you know, focused around issues of social justice and reconstructing events. I think, you know, especially where there is you know, ardent denials that, you know, an institution of power or a wing of military or government or whatever acted improperly or you know, committed a war crime. And so I think that's where this type of work has its greatest value, because it's evidentiary. So we're always thinking about this stuff as evidence that can help us solve the puzzle of, you know, how something happened, what happened, where it happened, when it happened, why it happened, and who carried it out, and all of that. And so we'll be, you know, as I was saying with the earlier investigations, it's about collecting all of this evidence, but really analyzing it in detail, like pulling out a model of a weapon that only the Cameroonian military uses, for instance, if they're not wearing insignia. If the Nigerian military mow down protesters, as they did in one of our investigations, with, like, you know, battlefield weapons, if we zoom in on the insignia or the number plates on their vehicles, we can identify which unit. And the reason that we would do that is because we know the US State Department, which is a military partner of the Nigerian government, will be interested in that information because they may review their military sales. And so, you know, it's not just retelling the stories. We're always thinking in our investigations about what the impact will be, how you can seek justice for victims and hear from victims and include them in the stories as well, which is why we're going out into the field more now and combining the on the ground with the digital stuff that we do back at base. But it's those types of pieces, and also, you know, instances that illustrate a broader pattern perhaps of abuse or behavior. And the investigation that we did into the shooting of a Palestinian medic, Razan al-Najjar, was an example of that. I have some slides on that if you want to see it. It was also very good use of technology to put this type of evidence in its full context.
Do you want to pull up the slides? Do you have time?
Yeah, I can do it fairly quickly just to give you like a sample of it. Where are we? Is that it?
Only if you have time now.
Do we have time?
We do, but...
I'm not doing the right screen, am I?
No, Oh yeah, no, you need to present it.
PowerPoint, there we go. How's that looking?
Yeah, that's good.
Okie doke. So yeah, Razan Al-Najjar, we had actually, you know, when our team was reporting on the Great Return March, which was the series of protests, you know, 2 summers ago in Gaza against the blockade, they ran into Razan, and they were struck by, you know, her charisma and her pacifism, and you know how much of a character she was really. And she was the first woman to volunteer as a medic on the fields, which kind of broke through gender boundaries, and lots of the people we interviewed afterwards said that she had inspired them to come onto the protest field, because it wasn't really the domain of women in Gaza. And then she was killed on June 1st. Everybody said by an Israeli bullet. The Israeli Defense Forces were policing these protests and keeping people back from the fence that separates Gaza from Israel. And you know, we just did what we usually do. We collected lots of footage. We had a really good source network there. We in fact collected 1,300 videos and photographs from around 40 different people. And we organized all of those by time. We got the original files, which, as I was explaining earlier, have the hour, minute, and second that the videos were taken. And so many of them overlapped. This is actually the moment in which he was shot. And you can see medics were on the ground treating somebody when the bullet whipped right past them. You can see the dust from the bullet hitting the ground here, just going past. And so this gave us, you know, a really good understanding of what was going on in the area at the time, how close people were to the fence, the chaos that happened afterwards, all of that sort of stuff. And so synchronizing footage like that is part of our reporting. This is another tool that we might use to kind of, what you're seeing in the middle here is the actual video. And then as it stretches out across the landscape, we can create a panoramic view of it. And that was really important reporting for us to do, because over here is the fence where the soldiers are, and over here is the crowd of protesters. And you're not allowed to use lethal force unless there's an imminent threat to life by the fence. And we were examining, like, who was the closest person to the fence at that time, how far were they away, and what was going on. And then we also went out there with our drones, and we saw permission from the IDF to film the area with our drones, so that they wouldn't shoot them down. And you can see here, we used a technique called photogrammetry to stitch those high resolution images into a 3D model of the space. And although the soldiers weren't there at that time, you know, we were able to use the footage from the day to sketch them in and to create this model of the protest space, and where the soldiers were over here, where the bunkers were, where the IDF, the soldiers' vehicles were, and I'll show you in a bit where the protesters were. So we're also going through the footage frame by frame, and that 3D model that I just showed you was so high definition that you could actually see the tufts of grass, and objects in the background like a tent or a stand, and there were towers over here that allowed us to triangulate every frame of the video and insert the cameraman into the 3D model. And as we're looking through the footage, we're kind of pulling out, this is Rami, so he was one of the medics, and you can see he's wearing a pink stripe here on his shirt, and he's holding his thigh, because the bullet grazed his leg and then continued on and hit Razan in the chest. And this is Mohammed. He was also hit by some shrapnel, and that's Rami's injury. And then over here, as the camera is kind of frantically panning over here to the left, there's some more of the medics here. You can see Razan in the middle. And we knew that was Razan, because in another video just taken a few seconds earlier, she's holding on to this woman, Lamia's hand, and you can see the two of them are walking this way back from the danger. Because things were getting a little, they had already just shot somebody further up the field, and things were getting a little bit restless and uncertain. And we also, just talking about that pink stripe, just to give you another example of how you can extract reporting from the pictures, we oversaturated this video for that distinct color of pink. And you can't see it here, but it flashed up here in her jacket. So we knew it was her. And we also had a third video that we couldn't use for ethical reasons that showed that she fell at that very position as well. And she was picked up and carried away. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing. And then because we're able to retrace the steps of the camera in the 3D model, we can locate everybody and where they are, all the protesters, all the medics, and then use multiple different angles to do that and create this model that shows roughly where the protesters were, but very precisely where people were in the line of fire here. And because we know there was just one bullet and it grazed this medic and it hit her, we're able to retrace the path of the bullet back to the sand berm, where just a couple of moments earlier we had a photograph of a sniper pulling out his weapon and pointing in that direction and looking through the barrel of the gun. And there were some other clues that we found from witnesses. But we went out to Gaza a couple of times as well, and interviewed lots of the witnesses and medics, her co-workers, doctors who performed the autopsy on her, and they gave us her autopsy records and photographs. And this is Lamia, who was standing right beside her in her family's home, and going out onto the protest field as well, so we can kind of understand the terrain and all the rest of it. So that's kind of an example of the same techniques of collecting, but using, new technologies to try to analyze it and put it and figure out what happened. And all of that was really useful reporting, because we eventually had a sit-down interview with the spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, and we had really specific detail to pin them on and to ask them questions about. And for the first time in that interview, they admitted killing her, and after that interview, they opened a criminal investigation, which is one of only 3. If you consider it was 5,000 people shot during those protests by the Israeli Defense Forces, only 3 of those were criminally investigated.
Right. So. I mean, it's so impactful. I suppose it's kind of like what you do at Storyful. It's a lot of monitoring and verifying in real time and shoving out the footage to the newsrooms and just saying, you can trust this, you can trust this, you can trust this. But what you seem to be doing now is just kind of slowing it down and actually putting all the pieces together. And also it seems to be a new element as well of actual on the ground reporting too. So is that something you plan on doing a lot more of, kind of mixing the traditional and new?
Yeah, definitely. We want to do much more of that. I mean, we've done it in a few stories, from Afghanistan, Nigeria, Gaza, in the Bronx. Our team finally got into Syria this year when there was a ceasefire. I'm just back from Louisville, where there's a lot of developments in the story of Breonna Taylor, and we're reporting on that at the moment. She was a young paramedic who there was a botched police raid on her apartment, and the police fired 32 times into her apartment, and so we're examining that. But yeah, getting on the ground. First of all, it opens access to all sorts of sources that you wouldn't know are there. Like I remember in Nigeria, people were afraid to post their footage on social media because of the repercussions. And in Gaza, there was a little bit of that too. And if you do your reporting right, you can get in with the community, and suddenly you've got access to all of this evidence, but also what they saw. And the victims. I remember we went to 2 hospitals. One of them, they weren't even reporting, they were treating people because, again, they were afraid. But we got into the hospital and we were hearing from the victims of that Nigerian shooting. And it just gives you, a lot of what we do, I think, is really technical, and sometimes it's fascinating. And I think people are really interested in the techniques and like you know, usually the slam dunk conclusions you can come to, but sometimes what's lost is the human story. And you can really draw that. It really enriches the story, I think, if you're hearing from people who are directly affected. And so we're trying to do that. Even if we don't get on the ground ourselves, like the New York Times has, you know, reporters all over this place, and sometimes we work with them as well.
Right. I could talk to you all day about all this, but I'm probably tired at this point. We didn't even get to touch on your Pulitzer Prize winning work, but people can see that you have a profile on the New York Times website where they can get all your work.
We have a brand new shiny landing page for visual investigations. And so there's, there's nytimes.com visual investigations visual investigations, and there's playlists of the work up there. I think that one is called Russia Tapes, because there was a whole series of investigations into Russian pilots bombing hospitals and other civilian sites in Syria. Yeah.
Great. Malachy, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rona.